without any further ado, I guess
Yeah,
we will
no
go
more
on
ado.
to the first thing, which was our Bledisloe wrap up. So Bledisloe obviously happened. The All Blacks claimed it in Test 3.
They did.
They managed
Overly
to get
convincingly.
it. It was very, very convincing. The Wallabies picked a green team in more ways than one. The jerseys were quite nice, but also a few youthful debutants and stuff out there, and it didn't quite go to plan, to be honest.
No, I mean, as far as the first game's concerned, the game that perhaps mattered most out in Sydney, the All Blacks showed up, and they showed up something fierce. I mean, Australia obviously wounded by that loss of James O'Connor, and had the young lad Noah Lolesio, who we'd heard a lot about and yet to have seen. And the poor lad had something of a horror show in that first half, that first 40, his first game in. But I mean, the tone was set very early on. New Zealand were very, very physical. Dungunu got himself yellow carded after 3 minutes.
Didn't help.
It didn't help indeed. And from there the All Blacks kicked on. I mean, they were quite clinical. They scored some beautiful tries. Thought Richie Mo'unga was excellent.
He was,
and they had the game killed by half time.
This is true. Rendering things like the tactical decision to leave Tupou on the bench that time for the first time, so that you could spring him in the second half, which was a good plan, I thought, and definitely
worked the following week,
but definitely was moot in the context of the Bledisloe. It just meant one of their key weapons wasn't in the fray as the game was getting away from them.
And one of the key physical components of it, like as impressive as the 4 tries were, there were some nice moves in there. It was a game it was a performance and a domination that was built entirely on sort of physical dominance. I thought there were some huge performances from some guys in that New Zealand pack in that game. I thought like Shannon Frizzell, Patrick Tuipulotu, they really, really stood up. And even from a defensive point of view, the Wallabies, they had this green guy at 10, they had Simone in for the first time at 12. They were trying to generate momentum, but every time they tried to get a little bit of go for it around the ruck, they were stopped, and the All Blacks did a really great job of shutting them down on the inside and still holding their width on the outside. So every time the ball got into Lolasio's hands, he was just presented with nothing, no kind of picture. And they ended up doing a lot of loose kicking, and they got a donut in the first half. I mean, they couldn't get a play off against that Wallaby defence, against that All Black defence, I should say.
Yeah, it's true. I think as much as like credit to the All Black pack for doing that, there were we were wary of the few going into that in our preview of that test, the likes of Salakai Loto, Ned Hannigan in that pack, who I just fear are a little soft at international level, and particularly against a monstrous pack like that All Blacks thing, and it kind of proved the case.
It was a pack built for the purpose of dominating the Wallabies up front, and it very much did that. There were some cute moves in there as well from the All Blacks, like wrapping up the whole Wallaby pack in a dominant maul, and then moving them to one face, the open side, and then having a massive overlap back the blind side, which Tuna Guafe butchered, but then scored the try, so it was all good.
Yes, indeed. It's one of those, if you score, it's no bother, but possibly could have passed.
But that was a lovely try. So there was some nice subtle manoeuvring of the Wallaby pack around, but it was all built, every inch of it was built on just physical domination and collision winning. And the Wallabies couldn't buy a collision. Like Nick White was frozen out of the game. Everything was going backwards, and they just couldn't generate any of that momentum that they got in Wellington, and it was flat, and then it got worse, and 26-0 was a brutal first half for sure, and stunned by it.
That being said, defiant to the end, credit to the young debutant Lolesio for grabbing that try. It was quite a nice try, and it was a nice little line that he picked.
It was the first time they generated a bit of speed and tempo. It was the first time they got Pataya on the ball in space, and he actually sat down.
He is a real playmaker for them, definitely potential. And we saw a bit more of his potential in the week after as well, when they had a bit more of a balanced side. I don't know if we can pivot onto that as well, because obviously it was a dead rubber in the context of the Bledisloe, but it wasn't in the context of the Tri-Nations.
No, absolutely not.
Very much an important win for the Wallabies to get back on track, and a really good one for Dave Rennie as well. Like if you were to open up your coaching tenure with 4 games against the All Blacks, coming out like 2-1-1 is
fine,
not bad.
Like, it's a funny one. It's hard to even define the meanings of these things, but the records in certain grounds are an absolute curiosity. Like if you were to tell me that the Wallabies were going to go, 1-2-1, 1 win, 2 defeats, and 1 draw, you might have guessed that the win would be at Suncorp and the draw would be at Wellington. Somehow you might have guessed that, and the All Blacks to take the wins in Eden Park and Sydney. I don't know what it is, but as the All Blacks have a great record at Eden Park, and struggle at times at Wellington, so too is the case with the Wallabies in Suncorp in Brisbane versus the stadium in Sydney. It's a curiosity. It's
one thing I will say is about Suncorp is just the way it's not a cricket ground for one, so it's not an Aussie rules thing. It's like the crowd are actually right on top of you, which helps a lot, because an Aussie crowd can be a vocal thing, and there were crowds at all of these games, which was tremendous to see, watching from a world away and a lockdown away as well. It was some of my favourites. So I've never been so engaged in anthems of two teams that I don't normally love their anthems, but I was vibing off every second in terms of the pre-match pageantry that went into these fixtures. It was great, and it was great to see the crowds. And yeah, the Wallabies really did come to play at in Brisbane. They were
it was obviously a different team. It was a different All Black team as well. Like All Blacks had sealed the deal. They had lifted the cup. That photo there is from Sydney the week before. They had won Bledisloe, and so the All Blacks rotated out. Caleb Clark. They rotated in a lot of different players. Like there was a rake load of changes from their point of view. So things were definitely slightly different, but they did try to bring that same defensive intensity. And the key change, as bad as you'd feel for Lolosio, was bringing Reece Hodge back in as a 10. And he might not be an out and out 10, but Reece Hodge is a very fine player with a very good head on him, and he's going to be a crucial part of this Rennie Aussie side for a couple of years now.
For sure. Like what that performance will give you such faith in him. He had to slot in, and he did.
Nearly the first phase of the game, the All Blacks are bringing that defensive pressure again, and he puts in a beautiful little probing kick between the two halfbacks. They get a lucky bounce, but they finish it beautifully. But that one moment is just a chink in that All Black defence's armour that sits them down
for the rest of the game.
Pretty much the rest of the game. They never quite got that defensive pressure back.
Because they're coming into the game thinking Hodge isn't a 10. We'll bring up that pressure. He won't know what to do with it. He'll kick us the ball. We'll run back. But no, Hodge is a very experienced, savvy footballer, and he can slot in a 10 despite not being an out and out one. He'll recognise the space, and just a bit more like that assuredness and that confidence. Like Hodge has been there for ages. He knows he can. If worse comes to worse, he can take a contact. Or like you could see in some of Lolosio's plays the week before, he's probably he's behind the gain line. I don't want to be buried in contact. I need to do something. Kick it away. Like all of that little young man panic that just isn't there in an elder statesman like Hodge.
Very, very controlled and balanced footballer, lovely kicker of a football. And he gave them just a different edge and a feeling of control, and sat down that All Black defence, which was crucial. That one play was actually so massive. You do that little thing, you put that little memory in the memory bank for the All Black defence. Then the ball sits up, and all of a sudden Banks gets a ball out the back door, and Tom Wright has a try in his first cap.
Debut, as you love to see it. It's always a good sign when the debutant winger especially is getting a bit of meat nice and early. And he actually had a very, very tidy game, all things considered. He was dangerous and probing on counter attack. He was solid in terms of the pendulum out at the back. I definitely think with Banks in as well, they kind of have a bit more balance in terms of that backfield.
100%.
But they looked very assured, and Wright looked very assured as well, for considering it was his first cap. Lovely weaving run in to set up what was the first of 2 red cards, which did kind of put a weird note on the game. It was played predominantly with 14 men for the second half.
That was sort of the intrigue of it. Like the Wallabies had got their plays off against the All Blacks. The All Blacks come back with a try, and it was an even enough game. There was definitely more tempo to what the Wallabies were doing. Their pack were giving some punches as well as taking them, as much as they were sort of physically outmatched.
The Phillips, or not Phillip and Rob Simmons coming in and gave them a little bit more balance in that.
Absolutely, and then you take Tui Pilatu out of that All Black pack as well as Scott Barrett was playing and Sam Whitelock. It was Tui Pilatu-less.
Yes, it kind of came like this, the levelling out.
So there wasn't quite that same domination in the contact, and then we had an even game, and then all of a sudden, off a kick return, I believe, Tuangafasi comes in with a bad high shot, and it's one of those ones where there's been a lot of talk over the week. It was bizarre sort of listening to it on comms, hearing Tim Horan, and then finding out afterwards
retrospectively that our friend Justin Marshall, normally a fair caller of a game, absolutely wrong.
A fair caller of a game. So I think I've racked up like Tim Horan, Justin Marshall, and now John
Kerwin posted on the breakdown,
going on and on about this not being a red card, or that this is some kind of injustice. it's a curiosity. Like the next one came in from Lachlan Swinton, which is afterwards actually a worse one. But like as far as the rules are concerned, this is a point blank easy red card decision, and this is based on a framework that was released well over a year ago now. That was in play.
We covered it on the podcast. We went through it. Everyone got it. Was up. It was available. You could Google it and find it.
Yeah, there's a whole detailed list in terms of the framework. There's videos as well as written forms that you can find to see how they're judging high tackles. And we'll start by just saying, like, first of all, you should know what it is. You've no business as a play caller, as someone who's employed to talking about rugby, to be in any way surprised by any of those red cards.
Yes.
If you have a shoulder to the head, that's an initial decision of a red card. And it is not the case, as some people are saying based on what they're hearing from refs, it is not the case that any bit of leg bending is a mitigating factor and therefore just a yellow, go on, sir.
Yeah.
It's not the case. There's aggravating factors and mitigating factors. So you have an initial decision and then you weigh up aggravating factors. And if there's more aggravating factors than there are mitigating factors, you can actually boost it up. So you can have an initial yellow, but it's so blatant, it's in the open field. And
it's cynical, it's killing a play, they have a chance for a try, all of that.
It can be boosted up, etc. A just a penalty can be boosted up to a yellow can be boosted up to a red with aggravating factors. And as it was with the Tuonga Fassi situation, yes, there's a little bit of a dip from right, and yes, he's a bigger man, but because he's in the open field, he has a clear point of view, he starts high and he finishes high, he gets his technique all wrong and ends up with his shoulder in the head. There's absolutely no way under the tackle framework it can be any other decision. It's the easiest call in the world for that referee, and if he calls anything else, he's made a blatant mistake in the context of those rules. Likewise with the Swinton one, which I think is less controversial. You know, when you've Tuonga Fassi, you've got a big man standing still with a little man running at him.
Yeah, it's harder. You can have sympathy for his one. In fact, like he didn't get low enough. But the guy is so dynamic that he's a big tight head. Like it's tough, but it is a clear cut red card.
Swinton's one is almost worse because he's the dynamic man in that situation. The ball carrier's standing still, and he's the guy who's flying in.
And it's Whitelock he hit. The guy's like 6'9" or whatever. It's like, how are you hitting him so high and so violently? It was terrible. Like that one was egregious for more reasons than one.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that they already have the man.
Yeah, they're a man advantage and leading against the All Blacks. What are you doing?
So as far as being surprised about it or in any way confused about it, I don't understand. Like as a fan, sure, but that the play callers are in there to explain to the fans why these decisions are being made, and the guys in Australia and New Zealand failed utterly in that regard.
They really did. But it's not the first time we've seen this. Like with ELVs, I remember noting with the high ball collisions, when before it was the high tackles, it was the high ball, because there was collisions in the air, there were people landing, and World Rugby did do similar. They released a framework that was trying to clear it up, and they did so, and all the vocab was there, and it made it clear.
If you land on the head, it's a red. If you land on the shoulder, it's a yellow. And that persists to this day.
It does still, but for the first season of it, you'd be watching some Super Rugby from Australia or something, or like an Aussie conference, and you'd be listening to the Aussie commentators, and not like they would just ignore it. Sometimes there'd be massive collisions. A guy lands on his head, and they're just going like talking about something else, or going like, "Oh, that's play on," you know. And it's like, you may want it to be play on. You may think, "Oh, the game's gone soft. You should just play on there." And it's like, even if you think that, you have to qualify it by saying that's not the law. Like you're a play caller, and
you should know the law if you're calling the game. Like we don't get paid for this, but we actually bothered to do a bit of research on it. So it's actually super disappointing to see the likes of Justin Marshall and Tim Horan and John Kerwin, these legends of the game, who are, you know, calling and explaining the game to fans to do such a poor job in that regard, and just an ignorant job. That's just disappointing. As far as whether it should or shouldn't be, obviously that's going to be open to interpretation. It's going to be open to opinion. I would err on the side of like, you know, these head contacts should stop. It's poor technique in the tackle.
That's the main thing.
It's poor technique that results in the opposition getting hit in the head. And as far as like John Kerwin was saying in his sort of weaving rant about it, that like these red cards are killing games, I can think of so few examples where that's the case. The team is punished. It's a harshly punished thing because it's a harsh thing to do to someone, you know, catching them in the head. But it's not like there's no examples. I would say that like the examples of games being absolutely killed by a red card are pretty few and far between, and they don't include last week's game just because the All Blacks ended up losing. There was a red card each, both extreme fair calls, and what followed to pivot on was actually a cracking game of rugby through the second half.
Yes, exactly. No, it's it was absolutely madness to be reading some of these responses to that red. But as you say, no, the spectacle wasn't spoiled at all, and it just created a little bit more space that on the pitch that you can try and attack. Then it's like just a little more room for some of these outside backs and things. And the ones who responded better were definitely the Wallabies.
Well, it was interesting. Like they obviously were down a bit of heft themselves. Obviously, the All Blacks were in losing Tuangafasi, losing just that bit more heft. But it was interesting. Like all that forward dominance that we talked about in the Bledisloe game that they had won the week before, where they took the cup, that was kind of dissipated, and what was left was a pretty even pack battle. And then sort of the clinical edge that the All Blacks had shown the prior week sort of disappeared. And even the try they scored was not clinically taken. Lemape threw a pass that was poor, and it just sort of broke. In the end, I can't remember who scored it. It was Rico who scored it. Yes, with that dot down.
One-handed dot down that he's
persisting with it. Yeah, absolutely. But likewise, just before half time, they had a line out from 5 out to take the lead. Where I think it was a drawn game, or it might have been a 3-point lead for the Wallabies. But they had a line out 5 out going for a try right on half time, which is where you think this is New Zealand City.
Yeah.
And Australia do make the play; they steal the line out, but it was just that lack of a clinical edge from the All Blacks that arguably you could worry about. You could also attribute it to the huge raft of changes that came in.
There was a raft of changes. I thought it was quite a disjointed and not a great balance to the team. Just if you were to read it out to me on paper, which we did before watching it, the centres I'm not convinced of when you have Leonard Brown, and then Jordy Barrett at fullback with D-Mac on the bench, and then you bring D-Mac off the bench to come onto the wing where he's frozen out
towards the end of it,
it's not really using your weapons correctly or deploying them properly.
It was definitely not two distributors, it was one distributor. If you got Lemape, Leonard Brown and Jordy in those potential distribution roles, you haven't actually got a second distributor out there, and so it kind of proved, I thought, without that forward dominance and without that physical dominance that they had the week prior, they did lack a little something, and they ended up struggling to get some go forward. And the clinical edge and the creativity elements that have been sort of on the back burner as they sort of lean into a much more physical game than they even would have been maybe 4 years ago, and back even when they were winning World Cups. It's a lot more physical, this Ian Foster All Black team, and without that physical dominance, they didn't look great, and the Wallabies kind of exploited it. I did think it was a high standard game, but the All Blacks they couldn't really get much off on offense, and that's definitely going to be a concern.
It was a concern for sure. I will caveat by saying it was a whole host of changes. But then from the Wallabies' point of view, the mentioning Tupou in terms of game one, he was frozen out. The game was over by the time he came off. But this time around, springing Tupou from the bench with 30 odd minutes to go is a great shout, because he just won every single carry and then got on top in the scrum as well. Such a dynamic guy, and as you say, he's kind of one of those really explosive athletes, fast twitch, explosive and really powerful. Does not mind his cardio at all. Just dumps himself into every play 110% in every instance, which is fantastic. But it just means when you have the option, because you do have another solid tight head in Alatoa, it's a really useful thing to be able to spring him from the bench, and something they probably learned from the second test more so than the first or the third.
When the All Black bench just come on and
the last quarter was just, they were nowhere, and they were having to haul Phillip off after him making 20 odd tackles and bruised and bloodied, and it's like, what do we actually have to spring in the second half to help us out? And you can see even with France, they're bringing the likes of Camille Chat off the bench. It's a
similar kind of dynamic to the Camille Chat thing, where you have this really explosive guy coming on for the more solid guy. And I definitely love it as a play. As far as Tupou is concerned, unstoppable in the loose and in the scrum.
He's a Thor even.
For sure, like Tongan Thor. Listen, we were hearing about him years ago in that capacity, but right now he is the best tight head out there. He is phenomenal to watch. There isn't a better tight head out there. Both at scrum time and and in ball carrying around the loose. He's extremely explosive. He's tightened up his discipline. Haven't seen him make too many discipline errors. When they did come in, they came in sort of after he was tired when he was starting. In those opening 2 games. But certainly when he's at fever pitch, coming on off the bench, he's an incredible specimen to watch. And he did give the Wallabies that extra edge physically to actually start getting on top of the All Blacks and win the game for them.
Yeah, for sure. He's such a difference maker and will become a key man in this Wallabies side going forward. And yeah, like the only caveat is obviously there's no Springboks in this year's championship, so there's a real trial of fire when you're trying to scrummage against the Springboks. But in terms of passing every test so far, he's done that with spades. And then just, I suppose, with conclusions from all of that Bledisloe series, what do you make of it?
Yeah, 4 tests, 4 great games, pretty much every game. Obviously, the one in Syndey was the biggest blowout, and that was, a tough watch for the
Eden
Wallabies.
Park was tough enough for the Wallabies as well. But
It was. I mean, the All Blacks are still the best side. Like, their conclusions, they're looking at, a mighty physical forward pack that, like, they'll quietly be thinking could compete with the likes of South Africa and England, and I'm certainly that matchup is going to be more exciting perhaps than it ever has been. If the run game has suffered a little bit, but even so, at times their clinicality has shone through, and Richie Mo'unga and Bowden Barrett and Caleb Clark coming into the team is a huge draw for them. And they won the series. They did it last week. They still have some issues to sort out in the centres and in their I think personnel issues, but also just creativity issues.
Yeah, in terms of the multi-phase. But their instincts are still intact. When someone kicks loosely to them, their kick return instincts are on point as always. Like, they just have that.
Yeah, they have some phenomenal players, and Caleb Clark was one of the finds of the tournament. Tui Pilatu has finally reached his potential and looks one of the best locks in the world. Likewise, Tuanga Fassi as a tight head has changed things completely for them. They had a very solid line out drive. There were some issues at scrum, little wobbling issues at scrum, so not without issues, but they are still in a decent place where they can stake a claim of being the best side in the world, and they're certainly in the mix with those sides, and they're certainly still on top of their sort of, they're little brothers in terms of the size of the nations, but they're big brothers in a rugby context. And
their Bledisloe is seemingly just a resident in the All Blacks dressing room at home. They managed to secure it yet again.
18 straight years or something along those lines.
It's been a phenomenal slew of dominance, but strings of positive things for the Wallabies for sure. This was a more competitive Bledisloe than we've been treated to for the last few years for sure.
Yeah,
there was
100%.
Definitely, I like the balance. I like what Rennie's brought. I think, to be fair, like Australia, their tradition of rugby and running rugby and their kind of ability to spot a try and take a try, that is very copacetic with what Dave Rennie was trying to do, be it with the Chiefs or with Glasgow. He has an instinct for that, tries to get his teams playing that way. So I think this match is going to work very well for them. I think all the players have bought in. I think he's by and large picked the right personnel as well. I think the faith he put in Nick White was well founded.
There was a lot of chat pre-tournament about dumping Nick White for a Tate McDermott, and he definitely, even the Wellington test alone, but also since then, very nice controller of a game decision, especially after James O'Connor went. But I mean, going forward for the Wallabies, there's a bundle of potential. I mean, I really like the idea of having O'Connor at 10, possibly Reece Hodge at 12, because he's very tough, but he's also got that boot to bail out O'Connor if need be.
Passing game.
And then you've got Pataya at 13, who's very distribution. He can be a distributor. He can also be a strike runner.
He's physical as well. He's good in the contact.
Beautiful runner of a ball. And then maybe having a solid Tom Banks at fullback, and then you have options between Wright and Corabetti and Dungunu on the wing. Like, that's a really balanced backline. And I think Reece Hodge was the missing element that came into it last week. And I'd be excited about seeing him and O'Connor like in the 10
Nick White.
Yeah, all
of them
distributing together. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and actually, to be fair, your Pataya is such a distributor as well, in a different sense. He'll distribute post contact or just get the hands.
But he can also pick a line if need be. And likewise, Reece Hodge, he can play 12 and truck it up if need be.
Yeah,
but he has a great boot, which is key. I think in terms of just the difference it made having smart kicking in terms of sitting down the All Black defence was massive in that last game.
And
I think they're slowly putting it together. Their pack is a little slighter, so it has to be quicker and more dynamic.
For sure,
and that's something they're figuring out.
I have a lot of faith in Philip. I think he's a good find for them. I'm not sure they've found his best potential partner yet. Certainly from a Leinster point of view, if Scott Fardy was in there with him, that would suddenly be a very, very, very good second row thing. Whereas
Rob Simmons is fine.
Rob Simmons is fine. He's an actual second row. Sakai Loto, I think, is
more of a back
row. He's kind of a bit like Tyg Byrne in Ireland. He's like, is he an international caliber second row, or is he a little light?
Yeah, because the job only gets tougher. There's a lot of just across world rugby. There's a lot of bruising second rows out there, and you've got to be up to the fight if you're going to play in that position because it's coming at you. And that they actually suffered in that area in their line out mole defence.
Yes,
they didn't really get anything off in there, and that's something they'll need to find.
And just the heft of their maul. Like they managed to actually get a bit of go for it, because their maul structure, we were talking about the Brumbies, they know how to maul it, but they just didn't have the heft to move them in the first few tests. But then even when they took Salakai Loto out and replaced him with an actual second rower, they managed to get a little bit of purchase at the maul in the final test, which was good to see. So like there's definitely shades of positivity everywhere,
and a great scrum, which they haven't had forever, and that's exciting. And seeing that scrum matching up against some of the European ones, obviously we won't see it 2020, but that it bodes nicely, and bodes well for the future for Australia. And they have 2 games left in the season, obviously, as have New Zealand.
Yes.
But that was it was a brilliant Bledisloe Cup. It was a great watch, and it just adds levels of intrigue to the seasons to come.
It does, for sure.
Thanks for watching the Overlap Rugby podcast. If you enjoyed that video, please be sure to like and subscribe. And hey, if you have an opinion of your own, if you disagree with what we're saying, leave a comment down below. We might just get back to you.